In September 2009, the Rhiwbina Civic Society welcomed members and guests to a rather special event. They gathered together to unveil the Society's first blue plaque, to commemorate the first curator of the St Fagans National History Museum, who had been a resident of Rhiwbina. Dr. Iorwerth Cyfeiliog Pete had lived with his family at 29 Lorna Dial from 1929 to 1948, and the plaque, which is on the house front of current residents Richard and Sue Essex, celebrated this connection with Rhiwbina. The committee is now planning its next blue plaque and has drawn up a short list of Rhiwbina Worthies for consideration and for you to vote on this evening. The following video comprises cameo portraits of these people and reasons why they are thought worthy of honouring in this way. Edgar Chappell, 1879 to 1949. Edgar Lation Chappell was one of the original committee members and friends of Rhiwbina's Garden Village. He can be seen here in the centre of this group photo, taken in 1913 at Agroes. Born in Ystalyfera, he trained as a teacher and later worked with Stanley Jevons on the Garden Village movement in South Wales, and both were among the first residents of the pioneer scheme in Rhiwbina.
I'd really like to nominate Edgar Chappell because he was a very worthy member of the Society, having lived in Rhiwbina for many years. He was a key member of the Garden Village Association when it was set up in 1912. He was actually a secretary of the association, and he was involved in all the building works. He was a university professor, but round about the 1912s, he decided that he wanted to take a more active part in social issues, and that's why he was involved with the Garden Village movement. He died in 1949, aged 70, after writing many books on local history, in particular a historic guide to the Cardiff city centre, a history of the port of Cardiff, and his most widely read one was Old Whitchurch. Now in those days, Whitchurch was part of the Cardiff RDC, and of course it also included Rhiwbina. So his books now are a lasting tribute to him, and it's essential reading for anyone with an interest in local history.
Jack Jones, CBE, 1884 to 1970. Jack Jones, the novelist, lived in Rhiwbina for most of his life. As an ex-miner, he had a great insight into the industrial and social history of Cardiff and the valleys, and is fondly remembered as a local character around the village.
As a child, I remember Jack Jones. I remember him quite well. He used to like going to the Butcher's Arms, and he had a sort of a group around him all the time, and they used to reminisce and talk, etc. Now, he spoke Welsh as well, and he spoke the Gwenhwyseg, which is the language or the dialect spoken in this part of Wales many years ago, and he was from Merthyr. He remarried late in life with the librarian in Rhiwbina. She was a Mrs. Jones.
I first met Jack Jones when we moved to Penydre in December 1964. He was living next door with his wife Gladys. We lived at number 55 and he was at number 57. I went into Jack's house fairly frequently to see Gladys, and if Jack was there, we would always have a little word. And his study invited me into it sometimes, and it was absolutely filled with books, as you can imagine, and his old typewriter on the table, papers everywhere. And
I always remember passing the house, and I used to see Jack Jones sitting at the window typing away. Whether he was typing one of his novels, I can't tell you. I know that he loved to go to the Monaco cinema once a week. I think he was always there, probably the first day that it started.
When I was at college, and then later on when my first job, which was back in the mid to late 60s. I used to work here of an evening or a weekend in the men-only bar, which is amazing really, because you don't have men-only bars anymore. And that was towards the back of the pub. And that's where Jack Jones used to come in and have his pint. But he used to sit in the little room on his own. He was very quiet, which is interesting because, of course, a man of so many words with all his books. I knew that he was a man that had belonged to most of the political parties. He was a communist, and he was actually a Liberal councillor for Neath at one time, and he was also Labour.
In about 1970, Corgi Books republished quite a number of Jack's titles, and I had been told by other people as well, but also by Gladys, the story of Cardiff, which he called River Out of Eden, was really an excellent story. And I thought, right, I must have that. So I bought the 2 volumes, paperbacks, and Jack very kindly signed it for us, and it's a personal message. Jack Jones was very well known in Wales, and his stories were very enjoyable. They gave a good history of the Wales that had led to what we have today in many ways, all the valleys and the coal and the history of it. He could also talk well about it, and I feel that he is certainly someone who should be considered for a blue plaque, because his name is well known and valued in Wales.
Brian Kelly, 1934 to 1993. Brian Thomas Kelly was brought up in Hay-Olabont and at number 5 Agrois. Brian Kelly became a world authority on the physics of graphite. Today his memory lives on through the Brian Kelly Award given annually by the British Carbon Trust.
Well, I first knew Brian well over 50 years ago. I live in Agrois, and he moved to number 5 Agrois with his parents when he was a young lad. My recollections of him, in fact, he was a very quiet, unassuming boy, stockily built. He didn't ever hurry, but he was a very clever lad. I can remember one particular incident that he was very friendly with the boy that lived next door, and they were both in the same class in Witches High School. And John Jenkins couldn't do his physics maths. And I happened to be out in the garden and I heard them talking about this, and Brian Kelly said, well, it's quite simple. And he got a piece of paper and a pencil out of his pocket and he just knocked off the equations in maths with no problem at all. And he was a very clever lad in the sciences. And he went to Cardiff University and he took a BSc degree in physics. And he went into the industrial field of atomic physics. He was involved with Harwell, the nuclear laboratory, and then he went to Sellafield in Cumberland, and then he went to Canada. He lectured in universities and he was a consultant, all involving this carbon, a worldwide authority. But he was such a quiet, unassuming man that people generally wouldn't know the name unless they were involved in physics. When he died, his colleagues made a very large collection of money and instituted a scholarship to be awarded to students in his name, the Brian Kelly Award for it. And because of his achievements, from very humble background and sheer endeavour, I have nominated Brian Kelly for a blue plaque. He deserves to be remembered for the work that he did.
Evan Roberts, 1878 to 1951. In the 1940s, Beulah Road was home to one of the great religious figures of Wales, the revivalist Evan Roberts.
If you were to ask people these days who Evan Roberts was, I doubt that many would know. But at the beginning of the 1900s, he was very well known indeed. He was the instigator of the Welsh religious revival of 1904 to 5, a man possessed by fervour and who burnt himself out in his attempts to bring people of South Wales to a better life through his evangelising message. In the early days of the 20th century, life was hard in the valleys and towns of South Wales. Poverty was rife, as was crime and gambling. By the time that the revival was in full swing, football teams were holding prayer meetings instead of games, pubs were closing for lack of custom, and services in packed churches might last until the early hours of the morning. I dare say that many of the chapels now lying unused and derelict in the valleys were built to accommodate the huge congregations that resulted from Evan Roberts's exhortations. At the end of 2 years' constant preaching, he was a finished man. He retired from public life, and apart from leading the occasional prayer meeting, he never preached in public again. Having given away all his money, he was effectively penniless for the rest of his life, relying on friends and kind acquaintances for his keep. He first lived in Leicester and then came back to Cardiff, where he stayed for many years with Mr. and Mrs. Oswald Williams, first of all in Kincoed and then at 81 Beulah Road. He lived in Rhiwbina from about 1945 until his death in a Cardiff nursing home in January 1951 at the age of 72 years. I think it's fitting that Rhiwbina Civic Society should consider erecting a plaque to a man whose life was firmly tied in to the religious and social history of Wales.
Rachel Thomas, OBE, 1905 to 1995. Rachel Thomas lived in Rhiwbina for many years. Beginning in amateur dramatics, she was encouraged by Jack Jones to embark on a career on the big screen with her role as Mrs. Parry in the 1940 film Proud Valley, starring alongside singer Paul Robeson.
Well, I used to give her a lift back and forth to chapel every Sunday for about 2 or 3 years. So I didn't have a chance to talk to her, but I knew all about her anyway when we were giving her a lift. I remember her as an actress with Paul Robeson and people like that, and you know, her theatrical background. And I thought that she was an extremely modest kind of person, because she never dwelt on all the wonderful things that she'd done in her acting career, you know.
The Welsh mum image was not pretentious or false at all. That's how Rachel was. And many times we enjoyed her company. Of course, I didn't realise as a youngster really who she was. She was just a member, and she was Rachel Howell Thomas in chapel, and she just she was so modest, and she would simply become one of the members. There was no side about her at all. She wasn't you know, a huge celeb. She was indeed, really, you know, but she didn't take on that attitude at all. Years later, of course, she lost Howell, unfortunately, and was a widow for many years in Tulloch, a goedwig in Rhiwbina. And I had occasion to go to her house for different reasons, and you'd have this lovely welcome, this beautiful smile. She had this radiant, warm smile, and it was not put on at all. She wasn't a different persona to what she was in public. What you saw in public was what you saw on her hearth. I often asked her about her career, and she would open up with you, but it wasn't about herself. It was always about, of course, I was interested in Paul Robeson, and it was always about the other actors and John Mills and all these places she'd been. When she was in film or on TV, it was always the same accent. And by good chance, she'd established a great career before the advent of S4C, the one which we're celebrating now. And it was good fortune that she went in right at the beginning for the weekly series then, Bobble a Cum. And of course, she was a crotchety old character in that, and it wasn't Rachel I knew, but it was just showed her greatness as an actress.
Though born and raised in Astwen near Pontardawe, Rachel Thomas lived for over 60 years here in Rhiwbina, latterly in this small close at number 7 Agoedwig. Rachel rose to fame as a well-known Welsh character actor and is, in my opinion, very deserving of a blue plaque in her memory.
Rhiwbina Civic Society works to foster a sense of community and civic pride, and the Blue Plaque Scheme is one way that we can recognise those Rhiwbina Worthies that have made a significant contribution to the cultural life of Wales and beyond.